This is The Business Experience Show.
Welcome to The Business Experience Show. I'm your host, Lisa Caprelli. Joining us is my co-host, Brian Hawke. In studio today is Brian Clark. Welcome to The Business Experience Show.
Well, thanks, Lisa.
So, Brian, you have a world of experience. Let's start with your GrapeRadio.com show. Tell us how you got started in that.
Well, we've actually been doing Grape Radio, which is a podcast. We've been doing it for a little over 10 years. We started in 2005. And sort of interesting, it's a show about, it's basically a wine talk show. So we talk about wines from, around the world, and we interview guests primarily. When we got started, it was like, it's basically a podcast, and there really were no podcasts when we got started. There was a few guys out there doing it. But, in fact, one of my friends was doing movie reviews, and he was called Real Reviews, and he said, "You guys love wine. You should do a show about wine." And we're like, "Oh, my God, I want to do a show about wine." Like, there's a million people out there, critique wine and do scores, Robert Parker, Wine Spectator. There's all these different sources for information, and we didn't want to do that.
Right.
And so we thought that'd be fun, and we thought about, if we were doing a radio show about wine, then, winemakers would be interested in us,
Right.
And,
you must love wine, first of all.
Yeah, if you're into wine, it's like the winemakers, they're like rock stars, right? So, and we thought, maybe this is a way we can sort of get in with them. So we sort of started out as sort of a fun type of thing, but real quickly it sort of developed into, hey, this is pretty cool. We really like doing it. We want to do it real professionally. And, at the time, podcasts, most people who said, I'm doing a podcast, they said, what is that? They didn't know. But fortunately, around, I want to say, maybe after a year and a half, Apple introduced, podcasts as part of their services. So they had content of the music for their iPods. And that really, after that, there was sort of an explosion. It went from, maybe 1,000 people doing podcasts to hundreds of thousands of people. It became very easy. The beginning was sort of hard technically to get it set up and to download them and do all different things. And Apple just made it basically a push of a button, and it worked. So, and now radio stations obviously do podcasts of all their shows. There's all kinds of different topics, and NPR, there's a million different places, topics you can get podcasts on. So we were really fortunate at the start. We really knew what we were doing, but we started out sort of thinking, well, how do we want to do this and be professional? We need money to pay for it. We can pay for it out of our pocket, or which might be better, is we start selling advertising and that kind of stuff. So we started selling advertising on our show, introduction at the beginning of the show, and on our website we sort of had a banner for the person with click-throughs. And it sort of caught on, and we got really lucky. We got some big advertisers, we got some money, and we were able to build this studio we're sitting in right now.
Beautiful. It's a great
sort
studio.
of like a NPR, KFI type studio. We have all the same equipment they use.
Right. Here in Orange County, California.
Yeah, exactly. And we were very fortunate. And I don't remember what the first genesis of it was, but right around 2006 or 2007, we got picked up like on Business Week, and they ran a story about us because we're making money doing this.
Right.
And for whatever reason, it just sort of somebody read it, and another person read it, and all of a sudden we're on the front page of the New York Times on the Sunday edition. We're on CNN. We're in the Financial Times of London, and we got a lot of really great attention. It was great for us. The money was okay. It's not like you were making a living doing this, but it was sort of paying for itself.
Right. You're getting notoriety, credibility.
Yeah, but what it really did for us is it gave us access. All of a sudden, all these winemakers were seeing us on the news and seeing us on TV and, different things like that. And they're like, oh, I want to be on this show. This must be the place to be. I mean, we were just a bunch of goofballs. We didn't know what we were doing. But we got to sit down and really interview winemakers from all over the world and end up going on press tours and just really having a good time sort of doing what our hobby was, our passion. And that was, going out in the wine industry and having people who, we'd always wanted to meet, calling us up and saying, hey, can you come out? Can you, come out and spend a week in Germany, and we'll fly you, take you to wine. I mean, things like that we would have never had access to, and going to premier events and all kinds of cool things. It was really nice.
Well, hats off to you. So tell me, you've interviewed how many people by now in the wine industry over the years?
Oh, boy. We've done thousands of interviews, and sometimes we'll put multiple interviews together in shows when we go to trade shows and things like that. I think we've, between audio and visual, because we also do video podcasts. We haven't done any recently, but we have done a lot. We've probably done a little over 500 shows.
Nice. So tell me, describe one of your interesting interviews.
Oh, boy, God, there's been a lot of them. I mean, our typical interview is nobody wants to hear us talk. So we really want to sit down. And if you think about it, like when you go open a bottle of wine, what do most people want to do? They want to know something about that wine, right? People want to be knowledgeable about wine, right? And so we thought, well, what we should do is really sit down with winemakers and sort of do like a fireside chat, have them tell us their story about when they were kids and getting into wine. And sometimes, these fourth, fifth, you're interviewing people from Europe. I mean, the wineries have been in their family for 200-300 years. And so there's always really a lot of really interesting stories. And that's really what we want to bring to people. So when they open that bottle of wine, they've heard a half-an-hour interview, an hour interview with that person. They could tell a whole story about, the Nazis taking over their winery, or, when the Russians came in and destroyed the winery, like in Hungary. I mean, there's all kinds of interesting stories like that. We've had winemakers on here who have different, in winemaking, there's philosophies of sort of how to make wine. Do you make soft, lovely wines? Do you make wines that age? Do you make big, bold, powerful wines? And winemakers have very passionate about their style. So we bring in different winemakers. Sometimes it's interesting the arguments and discussions we've had on our show where people are literally yelling at each other and calling each other names because they're so passionate about it. And that's one big cool thing about wine. Everybody is very passionate what they do. It is it's a very artisanal type of craft for a lot of people. And some people, I mean, like I said, they've done this for 5, 6, 7 generations. I can remember interviewing a guy in Germany, and I said, his name was, I can't remember what his name was, a Helmut or something. I said, hey, did you always want to be a winemaker? He goes, well, since I'm the firstborn and my last name is this, I'm a winemaker. I don't have a choice. I'll be in this house that my father was in, and my grandfather was in, and my great-grandfather, and so on and so forth until I die. But everybody, it's, the one good thing is, too, it's also a hospitality industry, so everybody is very gregarious and open and just fun, and, everyone's people you want to be hanging out with.
Brian,
plus you're drinking.
Yeah, right,
So.
Exactly. Do you have any of the wine credentials that hold this, or was this purely a hobby that you were just able to piggyback off of and just run with?
Myself and my co-hosts, we've always collected wine for many years, and at the time we really didn't have any credentials, other than, we bought a lot of wine, we spent a lot of money on wine.
We had the cash to go buy it.
Now we don't have the cash; it's all gone spent on wine. But we have credentials now. I mean, just both in podcasting. In fact, there's a award on the desk. In 2006, we won the Podcast of the Year award.
Wow.
We won a lot of different podcast awards in the early time. And since then, we've won really a lot more awards in the food and wine industry. If you're familiar with the James Beard Award, we've been nominated for the James Beard Award, I want to say 6 times, and we've won twice.
Amazing.
And that's sort of like the Oscars, if you're in the food and wine industry. We won for wine journalism. So that was pretty cool. You look at guys you see on TV, and most of them have maybe won James Beard or haven't won. Like I think in Orange County, we're the only people to ever won at all, let alone, 2. So that's sort of cool. But I guess that's the credentials, and just doing it for so long now. In some ways also, too, the only bad thing is it's sort of like a job now. We sit down and go to wineries and things like that. It's like it's not as much you enjoy it because you're thinking about all these type of things, especially when you're doing interviews. You know how it is. You go in to do an interview and you go, what am I going to ask? What am I going to do? What do I want him to say? Right. And so you're always in that sort of that mode where you're not really relaxing and just having a glass of wine. You're working. So.
I when someone asks me what's your favorite wine, I have my answer is the best wine is the one you like. So you must get asked that all the time. What's your favorite wine?
Well, my answer would pretty much be the same as yours.
Yeah.
Wine is a really interesting thing, because it's been around for thousands of years, and there's such a tie-in between people and your knowledge of wine and almost like your intelligence, and it's so silly. But
compared to when you're a teenager and your wine choices, compared to when you grow up.
Well, the wine industry is really unusual because if you think about it, there's no other industry in the entire world where a millionaire or a billionaire will go out and buy a winery or have a business and say, I don't care if I ever make money doing this. I just want to sit out here and look at my vineyard. And there's a lot of like Silicon Valley guys and different people around the world who have gone and bought these wineries, like Stan Kroenke, he owns Scream Eagle. He also owns the Los Angeles Rams, you know, and he's been in the news lately because he just moved his team out here to L.A. Well, you know, he'll never be able to recoup the amount of money he spent for the wineries. It's not, you know, physically possible. And even though his wine costs $750 a bottle, it's still, I mean, you look at the economy, it doesn't make that much wine.
Right.
So you think about what business in the world is it where you could actually want to make money and go out and compete, and you're competing against people who don't care if they make money. You know, it's like if you opened a fast food chain, the guy down the street selling, you know, hamburgers for a penny, you couldn't make money. You know, you couldn't compete. And there's a lot of that in the industry, and there's a lot of unusual, quirky things in the industry. Because you have people that are in the industry because they just want to enjoy it, and there's people who want to make money doing it. And you know, it's something where it's just very unusual.
So let's name drop. Let's give some of your top brands that you've interviewed or that are your favorite in no particular order.
Oh, you know, we've been very fortunate. So we pretty much interviewed every major winemaker, wine critic, personality, you know, at some point or the other. I think Robert Parker is probably, I mean, I know Robert Parker and we hung out there, but he's probably the only person we haven't really interviewed that's sort of a big name in wine, because he's been burned a few times. And so he's really hesitant to do interviews. But we've just been really fortunate. I mean, any major winery here in the United States, we've sat down and spent time with.
Have you okay, how about Ron Barr? That one's one of my favorites.
You know, we have interviewed him. I think we did a video interview with him because one of the events we cover is a Napa Valley Auction. It was a charity wine event. It's really cool, actually. In Napa, they do this event once a year, and on average, they raise about $10 to $15 million each year. And all the money goes to local children's charities for children's health. It goes for workers in the fields who maybe don't have the kind of, you know, health coverage they need to providing for them. All things in their local community. And one year he was hosting the event, and we interviewed him as part of that process. I think his daughter as well. So, yeah. But
let's go back to your what had first brought you into wine? Like, what was your first experience with wine?
Well, I mean, just like Lisa was sort of saying, I have my favorite. Everybody sort of enjoys wine. It's sort of, you go to business meetings, and what do people buy? What bottle of wine should we get? And it's a social type of thing. It's a lubricant for just making people relax. You know, and there is, you know, both health benefits, but also it really improves the quality of any meal, because there's certain things that happen when you drink wine that sort of refreshes your palate and makes food taste better. So, I mean, I think I've been in wine for a long time, and it's just like, you know, people now are getting into microbrews and beers and things like that. It's the same type of thing. It's like they get into it and it just becomes fun for them.
Oh, well, so like your family wasn't a big, were they big winos when they were growing?
No, not really at all. I mean, we drank wine. I can remember my dad having like the big green glass jugs, you know, the 2-gallon or however big they were, of like with a little eye hole finger on it of like Gallo wine or, you know, whatever it was, and that kind of thing. My parents weren't really big into wine, but it's something that they, you know, really didn't pass on to me. We sort of learned on my own.
Yeah, it's crazy to think about, though, how you were just saying how like in Germany, that dude was the first generation, the firstborn, so he was born into wine. But here, like, you just come into it when you're in your mid-20s, starting businesses.
Yeah, you know, there's a few families in the United States who have been in wine for, I mean, like Gallows, 100 years plus, where, it's their great-grandparents started these wineries. But, you know, with Prohibition in the U.S., it destroyed a lot of the wine industry, and a few people were able to go because they were able to sell it as, you know, selling wine to churches and for other kinds of, like, fun purposes, if you will. And they sort of survived through Prohibition. But, that pretty much killed the wine industry. So really, and then after that, for years and years and years, people really didn't drink wine a lot in the United States. Up until about the really late 70s, early 80s, wine was not really part of the U.S. culture. And really until the last 10 years, it hasn't been a major, 20 years, it hasn't been a major part of our culture. So if you really think about it, that means maybe your father owned a winery, and you would go in, but not certainly your great-grandfather or your grandfather. You know, that's very, very unusual.
Interesting. I love wine. Well, thank you, Brian Clark, for sharing with us some tips about your show, graperadio.com. Who's your co-host so we can give him kudos?
Jay Selman's my co-host, Eric Anderson. We have a number of people that actually help us do the show. I mean, who wants to sit around and talk about wine and drink for free? So it's I got a long list of people who want to do it.
And
so.
Wine is something you celebrate with people. You don't typically want to do alone.
No, wine is definitely something to do with friends.
This ends another edition of The Business Experience Show with guest Brian Clark. I'm Lisa Caprelli. Follow me on Instagram at Lisa Caprelli. My co-host is Ryan Hawke East.